Hi everyone, so in this video I'm going to help you to very easily get 16 marks with the social learning approach, and I will also talk about how to adapt this to an 8-mark question. So this will be good for an open-ended 16 marker such as outline and evaluate the social learning approach or discuss the social learning approach. Okay, so let's start with the AO1 points of Bandura's theory here. There are 4 AO1s I've got here for you, but this one, the last one, can be used as AO3. It depends how you write it, and I'll tell you a bit about that on my later slides. Okay, so first of all, what are the principles of social learning theory? Well, they are observation and imitation. What does this mean? Simply put, it means that we tend to copy behaviour from a very early age, and this particularly applies to children. So here's the point you have to make, okay? Bandura is not slagging off behaviourism. He goes along with the classical conditioning, he goes along with the opera conditioning, but he's adding another layer, okay? So because he's working slightly later than Skinner, but around the same time. And he's saying it's about observation and imitation. So we actually observe behaviour and then we imitate behaviour, which is our way of learning behaviour. Now, little children do it very early on. And if you watch a baby, and if you can ever get hold of a baby in your family and make some faces at the baby or do anything you like to do, you will see how quickly they will observe exactly what you're doing and they will exactly imitate it. So that is a basic principle of social learning theory. All right, but there's more layers to it. All right, so here's our second layer. Now, listen up to this one because vicarious reinforcement is often misstated by students. So it is completely different to operant conditioning, though it seems the same. Here's a good example for you. If we had an operantly conditioned situation, we might have a situation where, and you might have seen this in real life actually, where you've got a child who wants the sweets in the supermarket and is crying and crying to the mother or father, give me those sweets now, making a big scene. Well, if the mother or the father decides to give the child those sweets, then that child has been operantly conditioned. They have learned that crying and screaming will get them a reward, the sweets. But that's not the same as this. Okay, so what is this? So, let's pretend that there's a brother there, a sister there. Okay, so when the sibling sees that child scream and make a noise and get those sweets, they have been vicariously reinforced because they didn't actually do the behavior, nor did they actually get that reward, but they saw their sibling being rewarded. So now they know, oh, I know how to get sweets. I have to scream and shout and I will get the same result. Okay, so that would be vicarious reinforcement. You don't do the behavior, but you observe the behavior and you see the other person get a reward or to get a punishment. And then you realize, I shouldn't do that either. All right. Third point, cognitive processes and the Bobo dot experiments are coming up now. Okay, so cognitive or mediational processes are very important. You can't leave this out if you want to get an A star or get a grade A, because it's all very well saying vicarious reinforcement and you must say it and and talking about imitation, but when do you actually do that? Well, only when you have these 4 things in place. If you don't have these 4 things in place, you won't have this sort of social learning taking place. So let's go back to my last example. So I talked about a child screaming for sweets in a supermarket. Okay? Now, if you are to be vicariously reinforced by seeing that happen, then you need to be having attention. You need to be seeing the child, seeing what your sibling is actually doing, and you need to be able to remember it, okay? Retention. If you forget the whole situation, then you've not got a vicarious reinforcement. And you need to have a motor reproduction possible. You need to be able to scream in the same way. You need to be able to do exactly what they did to get those sweets. And finally, you won't be vicariously reinforced, and you won't actually repeat this thing unless you have motivation. So you would need to have the motivation to get the sweets. If you don't like sweets, then even if you saw it happen and you remembered it and you can holler your head off, you have no motivation, you won't repeat that behavior. So you have been vicariously reinforced, but you won't tend to do the behavior. All 4 things have to be in place. Let's use another one to make it very, very clear. Let's say you've been seeing how people can fire a gun, okay? And you've been watching loads of movies and people firing guns. And, we're talking about like a very young child here. Well, in order for you to know or to learn how to fire a gun, and let's say the person got a lot of praise also for doing it, okay, then you need to have paid lots of attention to what they did and how they held the gun and how they pulled the trigger. And you need to have a good memory, okay, so you need to remember the information, and you need to have the actual motor reproduction possible. So you have to be capable of doing that, of holding the gun physically. Let's say it's a big machine gun. Well, you mightn't have the motor retention for that. I'm just, as an example. So you need to be able to physically do it. And you need to have the motivation. I fancy using guns. I really am motivated to do it. Okay, so all 4 need to be in place. The final thing that's going to decide whether that vicarious reinforcement will lead to you doing that behavior is role models. You are more likely, and this is particularly so of young children, you are more likely to copy a behavior when you have a role model who you admire or who you would like to be. Okay, so you must have somebody that you could potentially be like them, do things like them. Of course, for most kids, that simply means adults. Okay, so adults are the role models for young children all the time, okay, because they know they're going to grow up and they need to learn how to do things. But it can also be slightly gender biased. So therefore, for a young girl, she is more likely to learn from a woman, and for a young boy from a man. And that's a rather important thing to add. Right, so let's now move on to the Bobo doll experiments. So let's go with the Bobo doll experiments, put really simply for a 16-mark answer. There were 2 groups of children in the first set of experiments. One watched an aggressive role model with the doll, and the other watched a non-aggressive role model. And so this role model was an adult. It was often a woman to begin with. And if you go onto YouTube and watch the original footage from Bandura's experiments, you will get a really good idea how this was actually done. Okay, so we have independent groups, and we are concerned to see which group is going to play with the Bobo doll and model what they have seen. So the kids were therefore taken off to a room along the corridor where they met the wonderful Bobo doll they'd seen before, and they were left alone to see what they would do. And there with them was all the toys and all the things like a hammer that they had seen before. And these are the results. Those who had observed the aggressive role model behaved more aggressively with the Bobo doll. And that's it. So it strongly supports Bandura's theory of social learning. that we see a behavior and we imitate that behavior exactly. And they did imitate it exactly, but they were also quite creative. Okay, but that's for AO3. Next point. 3 more conditions in the Bobo doll experiment. The children saw an adult being, and this should say punished for aggression towards the doll. This would be typically where there was another adult came in and said, bad person, your behavior is so bad you're not going to get any sweets later. Or the next condition where the adult was praised for their behavior to the doll. And they'd be told things like, you're really bashing that doll super duper, you're a great person, you're going to get sweets afterwards. And the last condition, the control condition, where there was neither reward nor punishment shown. And these are the results. Very simply, those children who saw aggression rewarded were more aggressive. So those who were in this group here who saw praise happening, they were more likely to be more aggressive. So supporting vicarious reinforcement. Now, for the AO3 evaluation points, I got 2 main AO3 plus points and 3 minus points. You may want to go and grab a pen and paper here because these are quite complicated but very interesting points I'm going to make. Right here, first of all, a plus is that this model goes further than the behavioural approach by Skinner, and it includes cognitive factors. What does that mean? Well, as I've said before, this is not a really contradictory model. It goes along with the operant conditioning. It goes along with the classical conditioning, but it's just added a new layer. These factors here, these motivational factors that we saw on the last slides. Now that's a new thing, and it's a good thing because in a way it shows we have a little bit of free will. We decide if we've got the motivation to do things, and that fits in here. So therefore it is less deterministic than the behavioral approach was originally. So therefore we have a little bit of free will and we decide our motivations. Our motivations can't be decided for us. That's a theory. So it is less deterministic. Now the minus points. Lab experiments like Bandura's have many particular issues, and here there are some particular issues. So here they are, and you need to listen up. The actual Bobo doll itself is a doll that's meant to be hit. It's a very important point. So there is an argument that they were simply playing. Here's the next point. It doesn't look like a real person. It's a clown. Clowns are pretty nasty in a way, aren't they? It's a strange thing about clowns. They make us feel like we don't know who they are behind the disguise. They make us feel a bit afraid. There's a fear factor involved. There's another layer of why they may have been hitting that doll. Here's the other point. The doll, never says, ow, that hurt, or whatever. So it's nothing to do with real life. Okay, so they're the things about the Bobo doll. Secondly, there may have been demand. Now, all experiments have a risk of there being, demand. There's a risk that people may guess what you're looking for, but here's a particular reported instance that you need to take a note of. There was a young girl who famously said, as she was walking down, a young child, as she was walking down from one of the conditions, to the room where she would meet the Bobo doll, and she was with her mother, and she famously said, "Mummy, look, there's the doll we are supposed to hit." Demand. Okay, I'm not sure they let her continue with it. I'm sure they did, but anyway, so there's a very clear instant that some of the kids had actually worked out they were supposed to. That was what they were supposed to do, was to hit the doll. I don't know what condition she was in. Obviously, she must have seen the doll being hit, okay? But it's very interesting that she'd already decided that was what she was supposed to do. So, there was demand. It doesn't mean that there is no support here for the theory, but it does have a question mark over validity of the experimental conditions, okay? Because validity means, was he really testing what he set out to test? Second minus point, it ignores biological and inherited factors. Now, okay, it ignores biological factors. That would be things like high levels of testosterone, but they're only babies. Okay, so I'm not sure we can really bring in that so much, but inherited factors, absolutely. They may have had parents who were aggressive, or maybe sort of grandparents. Often we get our genetic input, more from our grandparents, but that's for another video or for another thing to discuss. So they may have inherited the genetic blueprint to be aggressive, and we cannot rule that out. So even if they are behaving aggressively, it may be more to do with their genes than it is to do with what they have observed. And finally, there is no way to tell if long-term effects in these experiments occurred. So we saw them behaving aggressively then, but for how long did they maintain the motivation? For how long did they continue to be aggressive? Now, Bandura didn't follow them up. So we don't know whether next week the ones who bashed the Bobo doll as little kids were still aggressive. We don't know. Okay, and we don't know for how long that learning would have been effective. So that's a final minus point. And then for 8 marks, you could just do maybe sort of 1 of these and 2 of these, I would suggest. Okay, so I hope that was useful for you all, and I wish you lots of luck.